should parents buy Bluey the video game for their kids? I'm going to provide a more comprehensive review of the game in this video, but the short answer is yes, probably. If you have a younger kid who is ready to start playing video games and they really like the Bluey universe, I think they're going to enjoy this game. And I want to talk about some of the things I really like about the game and some of the things that might be able to be better. Before we get into that, I do want to include one correction from a previous video that I did, which was my very brief review. And that is, I said there were no subtitles in the game, and that's because at the time, I thought there were no subtitles in the game. If you are actively playing the game and you pause, there are no subtitle options available. There's no display menu or sound menu where those are typically included if you play video games. It was only well after posting the video that some other folks pointed out that if you go to the language menu in the options settings from the main menu before you even start playing the game, that's where the captioning settings are. That's where you can turn your subtitles on or off. To the developer's credit, one of them had reached out to me, his name's Vince Grogan, and pointed out that the reason that they did that is because sometimes kids just button mash when they're playing video games, and they didn't want kids to accidentally turn them on or off while they were playing. It was a little unexpected for me in the game to not see the option to turn those on or off. But either way, I do want to clarify that there are actually captions in this game, but they have to be enabled before you begin playing, and they can only be accessed right now through the main menu in the language settings. Let's talk about some things that this game does really, really well. And to start off, it feels like Bluey the video game. It feels like you are actually in the Bluey universe. You can play as any or even all of the 4 primary healer household members, and you can have up to 4 players playing simultaneously. This can make things pretty fun because any player can complete the objectives if you're actively involved in part of the story in the game. And if one player gets a little too far off screen, there's a rubber band mechanic that will pull them back to everyone else. Each section of the game is set up as if it were an episode of the show, so you have a storyline that's based around accomplishing some goals, and then once you finish that particular episode, you unlock a new game that you can play in just about any of the scenarios. This might be a version of Freeze Tag with the magic xylophone, or even Keepy Uppy. And while you primarily play as Bandit, Chili, Bluey, or Bingo, you also do get to meet other members of the healer family. Though you don't play as those characters, it's nice to see them included in the game. There are technically 5 locations in the game, but I'm going to count it as 4 because the backyard and the healer house really sort of go together. And I was pleasantly surprised by how large each setting was. It's much larger than you would expect it to be for a kid's game. There are some areas, like the park in particular, that really impressed me with the size and scope of what they included in there. There are plenty of collectibles for your players to find, things like stickers around the house as an example. There's also a repeated series of collectibles in each primary setting that you can find. If you find enough of them, you start to unlock pieces of a photograph in the lock menu. You also begin to unlock hats and things that your characters can wear. The collectibles do add a layer of replayability, and they might encourage the kids to play for a bit longer in the game, which is good because the story itself is relatively short overall. Oddly enough, I didn't uncover a long dog at some point, but there were plenty of cool things hidden around there and a lot of nice callbacks to the show within the game itself. And that's not to say there isn't a long dog in the game, I just didn't find it. So in terms of the overall good, the game plays really well. You feel like you are in the Bluey universe, which is a lot of fun. You can dress the characters up with different hats and costumes. You know, I love running around as Bandit, wearing the Bad Mood Viking helmet, and the animation style is such that you really do feel like you are in the Bluey universe. It feels like playing Bluey the show. Each location is a little bit larger than you expect it to be, so it feels like there's a lot to see and uncover, and the collectibles add a layer of replayability that if your kids are relatively new to video games, they will probably get a lot of mileage out of. If I had to levy any criticisms with the games, it would be relatively lightweight, nitpicky stuff, if we're being honest. One is that the story itself is relatively short. We're talking maybe like 1 to 3 hours, depending on how quickly your kid plays a game. So if they're really focused on collectibles, it will probably take them a few more hours. But if they're not, they could move through the entire story really quickly. There are also some spots where the gameplay mixed with the story leads to a spot where you might just be walking a few feet to the side and then it goes to a cutscene, and then you walk for another few feet and then there's another cutscene, which if you have kids who are relatively new to video games, they might find that stop start at times to be a little jarring. Every time you find a collectible, it also takes you to a pause screen where sometimes you don't have the option to exit back out for about 3 to 5 seconds, which doesn't sound like a long time, but feels like a long time when you're actually in the game. And I worry that that might generate some confusion with younger players who don't realize that, you will be able to go out back eventually, but you just gotta be a little patient. There are also a handful of platforming sections that I think might be harder for younger players. I'm thinking of the creek in particular, where they have a sort of floor is lava-esque type of game where you are hopping over the stones, and the moment you touch the water, which is surprisingly easy to do, you are immediately teleported back to the beginning. And I think that might be frustrating for younger players. There are also some collectibles that require a little bit of advanced platforming for younger players that I think might be kind of challenging or frustrating for them. This next part isn't really a criticism, it's just something that makes me chuckle a little. They have this really cool mechanic when you're playing where the players run by default, but whenever they're going up or down stairs, they only walk. And I love that because you want your kids to be safe on the steps, right? So even in the game, like they are safe, they're gonna walk up and down the steps. But then when you get to the top, there's an option to slide down the unprotected banister all the way. And it makes me giggle a little. And like I mentioned earlier, I would really like the option to turn captions / subtitles on or off during the game itself. I literally thought that there were no captions in the game because you can only enable them from the main menu in the language menu when typically those settings are held in video or audio settings and can be turned on or off during the game itself. So my overall verdict, is this game worth $40 for parents? I would say probably, especially if your kid is a bit younger and they don't have much experience playing video games. While you can work through the story really quickly, that also unlocks different games that they can play in any of the locations that they unlock while playing the game. So if you want to play Keepy Uppy at the creek or the beach, you can totally do that. And if your kid turns out to be a collector, there are plenty of collectibles to add into like a little sticker book that I think is kind of like a fun little thing. You even get stickers for the plants in different locations if you fill up a watering can and water those plants until they're fully grown. If you have older kids who like Bluey, but they have video game experience, this might not feel like it's as worth it. So I would say maybe hold off until it goes on sale. But as it is, this is the closest that you're going to get to playing Bluey the TV show right now. No game is perfect, but this one is really, really good. And I'm looking forward to playing it with my kids.